Welcome back to the Cyber Resilience Brief, a Safe Reach podcast, where we cut through the noise to bring you actionable intelligence and expert analysis on the threats shaping our world, and in under 15 minutes. I'm your host, Tova Devorin, and joining me, as always, is the offensive security maestro and our co-host, senior sales engineer Adrian Cully.
Thanks, Tova. It's great to be here. And today we're responding to a major new cybersecurity advisory, AA25-239A, issued jointly by CISA, the NSA, the FBI, and their international partners. It zeroes in on Typhoon, a state-sponsored group out of China that's been quietly targeting critical infrastructure around the world.
That is an impressive advisory list, and that's why we are releasing a very special episode today. Typhoon isn't new, but this advisory makes clear just how persistent and dangerous they actually are.
Exactly. Typhoon is an espionage-focused actor that relies on patience. Instead of smash and grab attacks, they infiltrate routers, VPNs, and edge devices, often exploiting old unpatched vulnerabilities, and then blend in by using stolen credentials and built-in tools like PowerShell, WMI, and scheduled tasks. Their TTPs, or as you know them, tactics, techniques, and procedures, are what we call living off the land, leveraging legitimate functions already present in the environment to evade detection. This approach allows them to establish a persistent long-term presence inside networks, sometimes sitting undetected for months or even years.
Wow, so we're talking about some major players. But before we dive more into where Typhoon fits in the big picture of cyber resilience, let's talk some specifics about this advisory. For this one, what tactics and indicators does the advisory warn about?
Sure, Tova. Some of the key TTPs include exploiting outdated Cisco and Fortinet routers for initial access, using stolen or weak credentials for lateral movement, living off the land with tools like PowerShell, CertUtil, and native Windows management commands, and establishing persistence with scheduled tasks and services. And for defenders, the advisory includes a long list of IOCs, indicators of compromise, such as the suspicious PowerShell command patterns, unusual use of NetSH for firewall manipulation, and anomalous outbound traffic from routers. Security teams should pull these IOCs into their seams and start hunting immediately.
So if you're running critical infrastructure, these are the breadcrumbs Typhoon is leaving behind.
Exactly. The advisory even notes cases where exfiltration traffic was hidden inside normal HTTPS connections, making it very hard to catch without deep inspection of the packets.
That brings us to the question every listener has: what should we do right now?
So the advisory is clear on mitigations. Number one, patch and upgrade routers and edge devices immediately. Typhoon loves old firmware. Two, audit credentials and enforce multi-factor authentication. Absolutely critically and especially on VPNs and admin accounts. Three, monitor for living off the land tools. Track the use of PowerShell, CertUtil, and WMI activity, anything that looks out of place. Fourth, segment your networks. We've talked about zero trust before. If you've applied segmentation, a compromised router doesn't give them a free pass inside your network. And fifth, review IOCs from the advisory and set up continuous monitoring and alerting.
In short, reduce their entry points, harden credential use, and look closely for subtle signs of persistence. All right, so while our guests are running their simulations as we speak, how do we begin to defend against a threat like this that's so good at blending in? Let's talk about where Typhoon fits into the concepts of breach and attack simulation, adversary exposure validation, and continuous automated red teaming. Let's start with BAS, or breach and attack simulation. How can that help us?
This is where we shift from a reactive to a proactive mindset. The traditional approach of waiting for a threat to materialize is simply not good enough anymore. Oh, they exploit things like vulnerabilities in routers and use lateral movement techniques. This is precisely what BAS is designed for.
So you use the threat intelligence in BAS to model the attack.
That's right. BAS platforms allow us to take the known TTPs of Typhoon, the specific vulnerabilities they exploit, the ways they move laterally using native tools, the credentials they target, and safely simulate those attacks against our own networks. This isn't just a simple scan, it's an emulation. We can simulate the specific attacks and immediately see if our security controls, like our EDR or our firewalls, would have stopped them. It gives us a data-driven continuous feedback loop on our defenses, showing us exactly where our security gaps are before a real adversary finds them.
So it's a constant fire drill, but with real world scenarios.
Precisely. It allows organizations to move beyond a static once-a-year penetration test to a dynamic, continuous validation process. It's how we ensure that our defenses are not just configured, but they are actually effective against the most relevant threats.
That brings us to our next point, adversarial exposure validation, or AEV. We're talking about a group that relies on exploiting weaknesses in our external and internal attack surfaces. How does AEV fit into this?
So think of AEV as a more holistic view of your risk. While BAS focuses on testing your controls against specific attack scenarios, AEV is about understanding and measuring your entire attack surface from the perspective of an adversary. Salt Typhoon, for instance, gained initial access to a major telecom provider by exploiting a 6-year-old vulnerability in a Cisco router. They also frequently used leaked credentials to gain foothold.
So this isn't just about technical vulnerabilities, it's about anything an attacker could use to achieve their aims.
Exactly. AEV helps us identify and prioritize all potential entry points. Is there a forgotten router with an outdated firmware on our network? Are we exposed to leaked credentials on the dark web? Are our publicly accessible assets properly secured? AEV forces us to periodically measure and manage our external attack surface to identify any critical gaps. It's about answering the question, where are we most vulnerable to an adversary right now? It's a fundamental part of mature security posture and something that a group like Salt Typhoon would certainly exploit if left unaddressed.
So AEV is that constant check on our perimeter, and BAS is the check on our internal controls? Or would you say it's the other way around?
No, that's a great way of looking at it, Tova. They're two sides of the same coin, working in tandem to give a complete picture of an organization's security posture. They are both about proactive, evidence-based security.
Finally, let's talk about continuous automated red teaming, or CART. We know Salt Typhoon can stay in a network for years unnoticed. How does CART circumvent or counteract that?
So, continuous automated red teaming is the long game version of traditional red teaming. A traditional red team engagement is typically a one-off time-bound exercise. A CART engagement, however, is an ongoing long-term operation. It's about emulating the persistence and patience of a real-world threat actor, exactly like Salt Typhoon.
So we've said before on this podcast that there's no such thing as a persistent friend, only a persistent foe. And instead of a red team coming and breaching the network and leaving, we're going to match that persistence here.
Yeah, the red team becomes embedded in a sense. They work to maintain a persistent presence, just as Salt Typhoon does, to see if they can evade detection over a prolonged period. This forces an organization's blue team, their defenders, to be in a constant state of readiness. It helps them improve their threat hunting skills, their incident response plans, and their ability to detect subtle, low-noise, malicious activity that might otherwise go unnoticed.
So CART is really about building an organization's defensive muscle memory.
That's a perfect analogy, Tova. Salt Typhoon teaches that the best attackers don't just rely on a single exploit. They rely on time, patience, and the ability to operate below the radar. CART is how we train our defenses to spot these quiet intruders and validate that our security controls hold up not just for a day or a week, but for months and years. It's the ultimate test of resilience.
Adrian, we're coming up on time. Thank you so much for this incredibly insightful discussion. It's clear that defending against sophisticated actors like Salt Typhoon requires a shift from reactive to proactive security, and that breach and attack simulation, adversarial exposure validation, and continuous automated red teaming are the tools you need to win that fight. Thank you so much for your expertise.
My pleasure.
The Cyber Resilience Brief is a Safe Breach podcast. It's produced by Tova Devorin and executive produced by Adrian Cully. Sound design provided by Adobe Podcasts. Distribution provided by Podbean, and extra support and love from the Safe Breach team. For more information on how adversarial exposure validation through Safe Breach can protect you and your business, no matter where you reside or what industry you're in, please visit us at www.safebreach.com.